comics.
We like
Comics.
because they have no bone.
Welcome to the after show for the podcast We Like Comics because they have no bones. My name
That's
is Joe
right.
Getcho.
And I'm Mike White, and today we'll break down the creative duo behind Deathstroke issues 21 through 29, which encompasses Defiance and the Fall of Slade, which were written by Christopher Priest and penciled by Diogenes Neves, and published in 2017 by DC Comics.
That's right. So yes, this comic was written by Christopher James Priest, who actually changed his name from James Christopher Owsley in 1993. He began his comic book career in 1978 as an intern at Marvel after graduating from the New York School of Media Arts. By 79, he was part of Marvel's editorial team, becoming the first African-American editor in mainstream comics at just 22 years old, which was remarkable for many reasons.
Yeah.
He was so eager to learn and grow in the industry, especially under the leadership of Jim Shooter, Marvel's ninth editor-in-chief, that Priest even began calling himself Jim in an effort to feel more aligned with Shooter and the environment at Marvel. His writing debut came in '83 with the Falcon miniseries, and shortly after, he became the editor for Spider-Man comics. However, his time as editor was marked by a lot of tension and some questionable decisions, which Priest later agreed that they were bad decisions. So one such was giving Dr. Octopus, one of Spider-Man's classic villains, a new look that he described as the moral equivalent of a dentist's smock. A costume design so wrong-headed, so utterly dumb, I'm not sure how I got away with it.
Wow.
Yeah. Longtime veteran on The Amazing Spider-Man, Tom DeFalco, was having scheduling issues, and so Shooter pushed Priest to take action. So he moved DeFalco to a new quarterly special called Sensational Spider-Man, so that way he could do as much Spider-Man as he wanted and was capable of doing, but Marvel would be off the hook for a monthly deadline. Seems like a smart move, right? But this didn't go over well, and it alienated him with DeFalco and around the office, because you don't take a great writer off of a great book and put them on a different book. I guess, he was creating waves. But the thing is, Jim Shooter was surprised, but they had discussed it beforehand. And Jim said, yeah, but I never thought you'd actually do it. So there was a lot of interpersonal relationships, kind of like the Deathstroke story, where there's a lot of stuff going on at Marvel that was just making it tough for him. So then comes Stan Lee. He makes the decision that Peter Parker and Mary Jane should be married in the newspaper strip Spider-Man, but Priest didn't like it, and he even went as far as to say, over my dead body. And less than 6 months later, Spider-Man was married, Priest got fired.
Wow.
Not only that, but his writing on Power Man and Iron Fist also ended controversially, with Iron Fist expending his life force to keep a terminally ill boy alive, only to be killed in his sleep by the boy, who transforms into a superpowered being. So Priest later says Fist's death was senseless and shocking and completely unforeseen. It took the readers' heads clean off. And to this day, people are mad about it, forgetting, it seems, that A, you were supposed to be mad, that death is senseless, and Fist's death was supposed to be senseless, or that B, this is a comic book. So he has a very kind of matter-of-fact way of dealing with things that seems like it bumped a lot of heads at Marvel.
Yeah.
So after he left, he continued to work as a writer, eventually moving away from editorial roles and focusing on storytelling, which allowed him to rebuild his career outside the corporate structures that were previously limiting him. He became part of the group of writers and artists that launched Milestone Media, which was a comic book publisher affiliated with DC Comics, where he co-created the character Static, among some others. Notable writing credits for DC include his work on Justice League, Steel, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and of course, Deathstroke, because here we are today. He eventually returned to high-profile projects and comments, notably revitalizing Black Panther during the late 1990s. His work on the series introduced more complex storytelling and redefined the character's role in the Marvel Universe, and actually significantly influenced the modern interpretation of Black Panther that was later adapted for the MCU, or Marvel Cinematic Universe. So then he changed his name from Owsley to Priest shortly after divorcing his wife. The reasons for the name change, he says, are personal, and any rumors about it are absolutely true. He's also an ordained Baptist minister, a singer-songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist music producer who has written and produced dozens of tracks for himself and others. And apparently, if you call him Chris, he may very well punch you in your face, so don't do that.
Wow.
And that is Christopher Priest in a nutshell.
Well, I was aware of him previously because I knew of him as the guy that revitalized Black Panther. That was kind of the reputation that I had coming into this. He did later write a Justice League arc that I was a little bit less satisfied with, but my reasons were mainly that he seemed to be ignoring some of the larger continuity happening around the characters and just kind of doing his own thing. Unfortunately, that was kind of just par for the course during Rebirth, where they decided briefly that continuity shouldn't matter if you're telling a good story. So there were a lot of issues with DC at that time, and that whole initiative. So probably not really his fault, but
he does seem the case to, or the type to say, this is what I'm doing with the character, and this is what I'm going to do. Like, exactly. You're not going to tell me. And if you tell me, then over my dead body, because I already told Stan Lee that you're not marrying Peter Parker and Mary Jane and left over it. So there's nothing else that could happen to me that would be worse than that.
Yeah, that takes some stones. Show me the stones.
Show me the stones.
To say that to Stan Lee.
Yeah.
Well, we have less controversy with the other side of the writing or the creative staff here. So the primary penciler of this comic was Diogenes Neves, a Brazilian artist represented by Joe Prado's art and design studio. And so I really couldn't find a lot of information on him biographical wise. So I went for kind of an art analysis instead, which we did some of in the episode, but his style would best be described as consistent by me. His characters are always on model, and that really helps with identifying who's who when they're out of uniform. So, and as you said, there were a lot of characters, so like you need to be able to do that, because otherwise the reader is going to get lost really quick. I immediately noticed when he took over the art duties at the beginning of Defiance, because the previous penciler had, somebody doing layouts for him. And we kind of already talked about that. So, but I liked how he elevated the action, and I think he was a good fit for the book. So I'm really glad that they hired him to do these 9 issues. Who I did find more information on was Dennis Cohen, who was the artist that did Deathstroke Annual #1, which was also part of this arc. And so Dennis Cohen is kind of a legendary artist that's worked with Priest previously on Black Panther. He's 63 years old, so he's been in the industry like a very long time. He is also one of the founders of DC's Milestone imprint, and an imprint created in the 90s to bring more diverse characters to comics. Among the most notable creations of the Milestone era are Icon, Rocket, Hardware, created by Cohen, and of course, Static Shock, which would have been co-created with Dwayne McDuffie. So, and at Marvel, Cohen is responsible for the last half of the Deathlock series, because he was apparently really good friends with the Deathlock creator, Rich Buckler, like right out of high school. And so he was like running errands for him and like doing all this stuff, even though he wasn't like employed by Marvel yet, just to sort of like get his foot in the door. So seems like somebody that was a lifelong fan. So his art is a lot sketchier and looser than what you saw in the rest of the book. So it's a pretty stark contrast looking at it. A lot of it is communicated through like the use of color over his kind of rougher and more, I don't know the word to use except like impressionistic pencils. Cohen almost paints with the pencils, something that makes his art look really unique and different. Let me see if I can find a panel here from the Fall of Slade that he did. Yeah, but if you can see, it's the characters are not quite as defined as they were. A little more
fluid. Yeah,
they're a little more fluid, and he's just looser in general with the design of the characters. You can still tell who's who, but it's definitely it's definitely a difference in how everything looked compared to the previous 9 issues or
Mhm.
whatever. So Cohen is actually most often associated with his run on The Question outside of his work with Milestone. So that's kind of who he is.
Okay. Well, we promised you a character discussion, so let's talk
Yeah.
about Deathstroke. So he first appeared in the New Teen Titans #2 back in 1980, courtesy of Marv Wolfman and artist George Pérez. Later, Christopher Priest would go on to say that Deathstroke is more or less a dark mirror of Batman. Rob Liefeld, who co-created Deadpool for Marvel, was a fan of the Teen Titans comics, which influenced Deadpool's creation, blending Deathstroke's mercenary traits with Spider-Man's agility and wit. Deadpool co-creator Fabian Nicieza noted the similarities between Deadpool and Deathstroke upon seeing Rob Liefeld's design, leading to the inside joke of naming Deadpool Wade Wilson as a nod to Deathstroke's Slade Wilson. So he's not exactly, it's not like, oh, DC Deathstroke is Marvel's Deadpool. Like they're definitely very different characters.
Very different.
But you can see where the inspiration was drawn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something important to note. There are plenty of video essays on YouTube where people have decided either that Liefeld did or didn't rip off the idea to create Deadpool. Ultimately, what Deadpool becomes is something totally, completely different.
Yeah.
And so it really feels more like a comic book fan's homage to something that he already liked than it does like, oh, I just ripped that idea off.
Mm-hmm.
So, Liefeld can be a controversial figure. I don't think this is a case where he was doing anything mean-spirited or trying to rip anybody off. I think that he just took inspiration because that's what we all do as artists is we see other stuff out there and we go, oh, maybe I'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then I'll make my own thing out of it. And I kind of think that's what Deadpool is.
Yeah.
So an interesting thing about Slade is that he was always a killer for hire, but during the post-Crisis New Earth years. So when we talk about after Crisis on Infinite Earths, the DC Universe's Earth is called New Earth.
Mm-hmm.
After Flashpoint, it's called Prime Earth. So when I say New Earth, it's like the 80s to 2011. Prime Earth is 2011 to now.
Okay.
And so that's how we can kind of differentiate them. But during New Earth, Slade was portrayed as having a stronger moral code, often taking contracts to kill real scumbags, and he did genuinely care about his family while he had trouble expressing it. So he might have been a little better at it than like what we see in these issues where he's like completely terrible, but it was like he does kind of have that like honor and that code to him.
Mm-hmm.
So in the post Flashpoint New 52 iteration, Slade became a merciless killer that would execute people simply for being in his way. In fact, there was this crew that was supposed to help him on a job in like one of the early issues of the first run. And I think he murders all of them just for like saying that he might need help. That's basically, he's like, I don't need help from anybody. And so he just kills them all. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So he was like really bad during New 52. He was like completely evil, had almost no redeeming qualities. And Rose Wilson also became colder and more violent to sort of match that, both during the limited series The Ravagers and the mainline Deathstroke title.
So is it fair to say the grittier tone of New 52 pushed a lot of characters toward anti-hero or villain territory, or was it mostly just Slade and his family?
There's a lot of them. And people ultimately were not super thrilled with those changes to certain characters. We've looked at books that really benefited from the reboot in the past. Aquaman was one that was kind of already due for kind of somebody to do a rehash or sort of a reimagining of the character to kind of modernize him. So he didn't really have any ill effects from it. But the Flash, for instance, took a huge hit in that basically all of his heroic legacy and his successors and all of them were just wiped out. Like they didn't exist anymore.
Wow.
So you didn't have Wally, you didn't have Wally's kids, Irie and Jay. I mean, all of that stuff just didn't exist anymore. That fandom was hit probably harder than most of them. And then unfortunately the Teen Titans were another group where they became like darker and edgier, and that feels like a weird place to put that on the like the teen superhero team. But if you want to see a really long exploration of that, I guess watch the Titan series on Max, because that's basically what they did with them as well.
Yep.
That felt very much like kind of the direction they were pushing stuff in New 52. So Rose was I don't remember if she was a contract killer. I think she was working for a villainous organization called Nowhere, and that's an acronym, and we never find out what it stands for.
It goes nowhere.
But yeah, she was working for them alongside Warblade, who was a character from Wildstorm comics that used to be a hero, but now he's a merciless killer. So a lot of the Wildstorm characters specifically, they kind of didn't know where to put them in the DC universe. So they were like, you're a villain, you're a villain, you're a villain. And so again, people that had been reading those comics before are like, what are you doing? Like, why are you making these characters that I like into like murderers and stuff? So, but that's for better or worse, a lot of it, I think, was the idea of, well, you know how when Final Fantasy 14 launched, they tried everything they could do to make it different from FF11. And unfortunately, that resulted in not really a finished game.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of go back to the drawing board later and get it into the state that it's in now with the Realm Reborn. And then people kind of embraced it more. A lot of the changes that happened in New 52 that people didn't like, sorry, the Rebirth Initiative kind of adjusted them or restored parts of their history so that the longtime fans would be happier. But they also didn't get rid of characters that first debuted in New 52. They still went on. So like this kid Flash, he debuted in New 52 in a story where I think he came from the future or something like that. So it was like a future version of him. But Deathstroke's family in particular really had their characterizations changed. And people that had read the, I think, 60 issues that Marv Wolfman wrote in the like 80s to 90s were just like, this is not my version of the character. I don't like it. So yeah,
well, they changed things that, like, I don't know, just kind of seemed like with Rose, they retconned her origin to make Slade and Adeline her parents instead of Slade and a Cambodian brothel owner named Lilyworth, which I had to look up and find. But it's kind of interesting. Like, okay, you made some really drastic changes to origin stories too. And I guess your mileage just kind of varies depending on the character that, you know, you were reading before New 52 and then whatever they decided to do with it. So sounds like Deathstroke's family kind of got hit a little bit, but the Flash family got hit harder.
They really got like annihilated. Yeah. And fans of the Teen Titans as well. They brought in a lot of really cool new characters to the Teen Titans, but the ones that already existed, like Tim Drake. Tim Drake is a great character. He's got the longest running solo series titled Robin of any of the Robins.
Wow.
And so he's got a huge group of fans. They have an issue fairly early on in the Teen Titans where, under false pretenses, I think he sleeps with two different members of the team in like the span of 1 or 2 issues. And I'm like, this is not what I want from, you know, my Robin. So they really kind of dirtied up some of the heroic characters. And while this was my jumping on point for DC, now that I've kind of gone back and read more stuff and come back, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that they did Rebirth. I'm so glad that they're like the modern era. We've restored a lot of their histories. But for all intents and purposes, it still was a reboot in 2011. They've never gone back on that and said, well, all their histories are restored. You kind of have to just read the various comics to figure out what's canon and what's not.
Wow.
So yeah. Can get a little bit confusing, but I think the heart of it is that they're returning the characters to the soul of the character is correct now, instead of that being altered. I think you can tinker with the origin story, you can tinker with some of the details, but if you're reading Superman and he doesn't act like Superman, then you're going to be like, I don't like this. Like, this is not what I want.
Like in movies or TV, when they change the character enough to make it fit within the context of the show, you're like, okay, you know, I get it. You kind of have to make that change because otherwise we're going to spend a season on something completely unrelated to the show in order to make that happen. And it's really not like having Oliver stab Deathstroke in the eye and that's what, you know, caused it. Yeah. Fine. It worked for the show. We didn't need any of the other stuff in there because it's not about Deathstroke. It's about Oliver and his struggles. So that makes sense. But it also makes keeping track of all of this stuff different because if you've watched the TV and the movies, TV shows and movies more than you've read comics, then trying to get into comics and then do you pick New 52 or Rebirth or before that? And it can just be really confusing. And I think that's kind of what's kept me from getting into reading a lot of DC is like, I'm just like, I don't know what, because what I know about DC may not exactly be what's in continuity, or it might be depending on when, what era I'm reading for. So this was a nice kind of way to get into some of that without it being so drastically different from what I'm used to. So
yeah, I think that where they've settled into with continuity right now, you don't really need to read the big events that much to know. But as long as you know that Flashpoint happened, it did restart the DC universe. And some characters had their histories altered, but generally most of what happened in the past is still relevant.
Yeah.
If a writer decides they want to reference something from New Earth continuity, they do, and then oh, okay, that's canon now. Which is actually what James Gunn said about his DC universe. He's like, well, because like season 1 of Creature Commandos, right? There's a Rick Flag Sr., and he references his son being killed on one of Waller's missions. And he's like, well, yeah, so now that he said that, now you know that my Suicide Squad movie is canon to the new DCU. And he's like, so when they say things like that, that will basically just clue you in that, oh, okay, that's still in continuity. And so they're not going to go out of their way to like explain why or whatever. They're just going to be like, if we decide to reference it, then yeah, it counts. So
kind of like in the Netflix shows and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for Marvel, where they referenced like the Battle of New York and all that stuff, but they kind of just, the big battle that happened, or, the incident from a couple years ago, or, now they talk about the blip in all the shows, like, the blip but they don't really talk about what happened and rehash it. They just mention it so that way, it's connected. So
exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So the kids, we did talk about Rose a little bit. We talked about her quite a bit in the episode, but Joey Wilson, who was actually Jericho pre-Flashpoint as well, he's a character that I know has a lot of fans actually, and he was also kind of portrayed in kind of like a midway point here in this story because like I was talking with my friend Nate, which Nate, thank you for being a great listener all the years we've been doing this. I know you're out there, but I was kind of bouncing ideas off him and asking him questions because I know that he knows that character particularly well. And he's like, well, he never would have thrown somebody off a building before. Like he wouldn't hurt a fly. He was like totally peaceful. And I guess the previous version of him actually astral projected his consciousness out, so it wasn't like eye beams. It was like he created an astral projection of himself that went out to possess other people. As far as his body being useless while he was doing that, I'm not sure if that was the case pre-Flashpoint, but I'd have to ask him honestly. But really, it's the fact that he even attempts to kill somebody would be shocking to people that read the old stuff in New Teen Titans. From what I understand, he had a pretty long run with the team there. And they actually do flash back to it in the issues we read briefly, where they show like his old outfit where he's got like the big gold things here and like a brown cape and everything. And I don't know, looks very 1980s. But
I need to go back and watch Titans now that I've read this, because some of that was lost on me. Like they show this guy who his spirit leaves his body and he possesses somebody else, and something weird is going on with Deathstroke, and there's all this drama and stuff, but I'm just like who are these people? What's going on? Like not getting it. So be interesting to watch that again and see how much of it actually mirrored the comics or New 52 or something, and be able to understand that a little bit more. But I also might be disappointed because it might be totally off in left field and nothing like, but it sounds like each of these characters has had a moment like that where, hey, this character is in a story. Okay, this is the character. And then later that character comes back and now they're totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Rebirth overall is just a publishing initiative. I think was kind of an attempt to repair the damage. They got a ton of new fans to come in with the New 52, but a lot of their longtime readers left whenever that happened. So that was really an attempt to give them an olive branch and be like, hey guys, the new people, everything you read is still canon. The old people, we're bringing back in histories and stuff that you're familiar with. So they were trying to kind of, have their cake and eat it too. So, which again, I think was the right move. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why this particular run was fun, was because it was kind of bridging those two eras a little bit for Slade. So
So I did a little digging about how his kids, kind of rebelled against him in various different ways. So one is Rose. She starts accepting contracts to prevent other hitmen from carrying out their contracts. Like, that's really a way to get under your dad's skin. Like, oh, so this is the job that you're doing. Well, I'm going to take a job doing something that's going to prevent people like you from doing their job. Like, well, thanks. And then, so Grant, Slade's firstborn, ran to Hive, which I looked up is the Hierarchy of International Vengeance and Extermination. And he got shot.
There are multiple. Depending on who's writing, that changes what that stands for. But yeah,
that figures.
That's as
that's
good
a very
as any
comic book thing. So anyway, Grant got shot up with a serum that allowed him to imitate his father's abilities and enhanced reflexes. So it seemed like he was actually going down the same path as his dad did. But then the procedure was flawed and it killed him. And of course, Deathstroke held the Titans responsible for this. So Grant tried to emulate Slade, while Joey's kind of more of the opposite. Like you mentioned, he wouldn't hurt a fly. He's more sensitive, lighthearted, and apparently he works as an executive vice president for a tech firm in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so, that's right.
Very different.
So Grant is interesting because in all versions of continuity, he dies sort of prior to the events that we see. But the method of that happening is different. What Christopher Priest did in this series is brought it a little bit closer to how it originally was done.
Okay.
The serum that he took was breaking him down. He wasn't going to survive it, and he had like the sort of gray Deathstroke outfit on, and was operating as the Ravager. So yeah, he blames the Titans for his death, but the thing is that Hive gave him that serum or whatever, so it's really kind of their fault.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit of misplaced.
But he probably signed something that said, "I accept the risks," and did it anyway. So they're probably absolved of responsibility. But
they actually in this series they showed early on, like they showed when they recruited him, and he was like going to college or something, and they were like, "Hey, like we're looking for people with abilities like you that are willing to change the world." And it was one of those kind of like, oh, I'm just doing a fun extracurricular thing for college. And then it turned into, take this serum because it'll make you able to change the world. And then it turned into, now go take out the Teen Titans because Hive are, aligned against them. So it kind of snowballed very quickly. But Grant was always kind of the angry, rebellious one where Joey is the more like lighthearted and kind of sensitive one. And then Rose, at least from what I've read, is the one where we're not really sure which line she's going to fall on. Is she going to be a hero? Is she going to be a villain? Or as Slade says, are there no heroes and villains? And, I mean, that's his outlook. So
just choices that people make or something.
Yeah, just choices that people make. That's right. That's right.
Well, it's funny too, on their, kind of origins, because, we had the whole fad of insert character name here gets radioactive material on them and gains insert power here,
right?
Just kind of like a recipe. And so we get kind of a similar thing here where it's like the government making super soldiers, or Marvel Weapon X, where they're experimenting on military personnel to enhance them to the next level in a different way than the super soldier serum. So it's like here you've got Deathstroke is a product of that serum, and then Grant is kind of more of a product of like a Weapon X kind of thing. So it's like these sort of trends that you see as characters are created in different eras where they're based on some kind of like mainstream story or something that's going on.
I think Grant was present very early in the new Teen Titans. I'd have to, the trades are up there, so I don't want to take all this off and go get them, but I think he was there early on. I don't remember specifically how he died originally, but it's definitely the case for modern continuity that it was he was there, he fought the Titans, whatever they injected him with was breaking down his genetics, and then he died. I believe in New 52 he was operating and getting in Slade's way, so Slade actually killed him with his own sword. Like that's how
Yeah.
That's how much like New 52 just seemed to make everybody more violent for whatever reason. So
And if you were already
yeah.
violent, then you're even more violent.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, doesn't
So,
he have to impale Jericho as well? I thought I read that
I
somewhere.
believe he kills him as well. My memory of New 52 is that we only have Rose and Slade active. And then the sort of wedge that was driven between Adeline and him didn't exist because
Yeah.
Rose was also her daughter. So that wasn't like a thing. So there wasn't as much like I guess inter-family politics because a lot of them just weren't there. So
Right. Yeah, you take away the fact that he has an illegitimate daughter, and you take
Right.
away the middle son who was the catalyst for the mother shooting the father, you know,
Right.
in the eye and all that stuff. And it's like,
yeah,
you know, well, what's left? Well, a happier family, but that's besides the point.
right.
And with
Yeah.
that, that's going to wrap up our after show for our review of Deathstroke, Defiance, and the Fall of Slade on We Like Comics because I have no bones.
And we hope that you have a happy family.
Yes.
And you can post about it online. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to tell us about
Maybe
your
don't tell
family.
us about that in the comments, but do tell us about your comic book experience
Yes.
in the comics. And also make sure you go to our website, bonelesscomicspodcast.com, where you can view the podcast, the episodes as video episodes, as well as, you know, obviously this after show, because here you are.
Yes.
And then also get some additional information about us, your hosts, and a link to our new Printify shop, like I mentioned in the episode, where you can order Mike's cool banana stuff on t-shirts, mugs, and more. So awesome. Check that
if
out.
you also like bananas because they
Yes.
have no bones, then check out our Printify shop.
Exactly.
And of course, as always, don't forget to follow us on all the socials, Boneless Comics Podcast. For most of them, or on Blue Sky Social at Boneless Comics 1. Use the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast to share your thoughts and let us know what you think.
And since you're on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. And make sure you hit the notification bell to get all the updates. So thank you very much.
Ding. Or else Joe will run you through with his sword.
That's right.
Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later.
We like
Comics.
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 Because